November 11th, 1918. In autumn 1918, after 4 years of devastating war, Germany was on the verge of economic and social collapse. With the spring offensive ending in failure, all hopes were gone that Germany could win the war. In late September 1918, the French, American, and British troops started the offensive on the entire Western Front, putting great pressure on the exhausted German forces. General Ludendorff resigned and was replaced by Wilhelm Groener. The whole army was severely lacking morale. By the beginning of November, all of its allies, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, had been defeated, so Germany was left fighting alone. Germany was also caught by winds of political change. Soldiers began to revolt, and protests and revolutions erupted in the big German cities. The imperial government was replaced by a democratic one, while Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated and went into exile to the Netherlands. Facing a total chaos in the country and a complete breakdown on the front lines, the Germans were desperate to sign a truce. Germany did try to negotiate peace conditions with U.S. President Woodrow Wilson earlier in October, but were reluctant to make the great concessions that the other allies demanded. This time, the Republican government was ready to accept any conditions asked by the Allies. The meeting was arranged to be held far away from the eyes of the public, in the forest of Compiègne, 40 miles or 65 kilometers north of Paris. Negotiations were led by German State Secretary Matthias Erzberger and Marshal Foch, who was delegated by the Allies to sign the truce. For the occasion, Marshal Foch's train carriage was brought in as a place of formal signing of the armistice. For the Allies, there was no room for any kind of negotiations. Instead, they just handed over to Germany their terms of unconditional surrender. The German delegation could only object on the number of submarines that were to be handed over to the Allies, but they were asked to hand over more than they actually had. The armistice was to cease all hostilities on the land, air, and sea. The German army was asked to leave the occupied territories of France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Alsace-Lorraine in 15 days, as well as to repatriate all the inhabitants of the same territories and Allied prisoners of war. The Germans also had to evacuate its troops from the left bank of the Rhine River and to establish a demilitarized 6-mile or 10-kilometer wide buffer zone on the right bank of the river. The left bank of the Rhine, the Rhineland, would be occupied by French, British, Belgian, and American troops. The Germans were obliged to leave the infrastructure of this territory intact with all its industrial stores of coal and other materials. The Germans also had to surrender 2,500 heavy guns, 2,500 field guns, 25,000 machine guns, 3,000 trench mortars, and 1,700 fighter and bomber airplanes. They also had to give away 5,000 locomotives with 150,000 wagons and 5,000 lorries. All of these had to be in good, usable condition. All of these requirements were made to prevent any German attempt to continue the war. In order to secure the safety of the sea routes, the Allies required Germany to surrender all of their submarines, to completely disarm their 6 battlecruisers, 10 battleships, 8 light cruisers, and 50 modern destroyers, and to intern them into neutral ports under Allied surveillance. All other vessels were allowed to stay in German ports, but also had to be disarmed and put under Allied surveillance. Finally, on November 11th, at 5 a.m. French time, the armistice was signed by Marshal Ferdinand Foch and First Sea Lord Admiral Sir Rosalind Weems on behalf of the Allies, and Secretary of State Matthias Erzberger, Count Alfred von Oberndorf of the Foreign Ministry, General Detlev von Winterfeld, and Admiral Ernst Vancelau on the German side. The armistice came into effect 6 hours later at 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. Even at the time when the peace was so close, soldiers were still dying. Almost 3,000 men died on the last day of the war. The last British soldier to be killed on the front was George Edwin Ellison from the 5th Royal Irish Lancers. He lost his life while he was on scouting duty near Mons, Belgium. Just 15 minutes before the war was ended, the last French soldier to die on the front, Augustin Trebuchet, was killed. He was shot as he was running to inform his comrades that hot soup was on the menu to celebrate the ceasefire. Canadian George Lawrence Price was killed 2 minutes before 11 a.m., being the last Commonwealth soldier killed in the war. A minute after, just seconds away from the armistice, an American soldier of German origin, Henry Gunther, charged at stunned German soldiers who were aware that peace was just seconds away. Gunther ended up being the last American soldier to die in the war. The last German casualty is harder to determine as records are less clear. Some records say that it was 18-year-old German soldier Alphonse Baula. He was killed only moments after hostilities ceased. He joined the army in August 1914 at the very beginning of the war. Many soldiers were in disbelief when they heard of the armistice, as ammunition and supplies were still arriving to front lines. However, when the news was confirmed, soldiers across the entire Western Front started to celebrate the fact that they were finally going home to their loved ones. The duration of the armistice was to be 36 days, but was prolonged on 3 occasions until peace was finally ratified on January 10, 1920, putting an end to the First World War.